On the night of September 8, 1967, an event occurred in Las Vegas that left Frank Sinatra not only physically knocked down but spiritually crushed. But behind this story are details that reveal a lot about Sinatra's character, his ego problems, anger control issues, and clues showing just how fragile he really was. Are you ready? Because today you're going to see a side of Frank Sinatra that no one knew existed. This is the story of how his Vegas golden age collapsed in a single night. And I promise you, you haven't heard these details anywhere else. From 1954 onward, Las Vegas was more important to Frank Sinatra than even New York. Because in Vegas, he wasn't just a singer, he could be a king. But the roots of this obsession trace back to Frank's childhood traumas. His difficult childhood in Hoboken, his father's absence, and his mother's domineering character created a deep need for acceptance in Frank. What he found in Vegas was exactly that, minus unconditional acceptance, limitless respect, godlike treatment. On the wall of his room at the Sands Hotel hung a never-published photograph. Frank smiling with casino owners Jack Entrata and Carl Cohen. Back then, all three were close friends. Who knew that years later Cohen would cause the most shameful moment of Frank's career? Frank's Vegas routine showed signs of obsessive-compulsive disorder. Every night he ate at the same table, sat in the same chair, drank the same drink, Jack Daniels with ice water, not ice cubes. And of course, his rituals at the gambling tables. During 1966 to 67, Frank's financial situation was much worse than it appeared. The lawsuit with Capitol Records, various investment losses, and especially the penalty from the Nevada Gaming Commission after the Cal Never Lodge scandal had put Frank in serious financial trouble. But Frank never let anyone know about this. Even close friends like Dean Martin were unaware of Frank's true financial condition. The credit limits in Vegas weren't just entertainment tools for Frank Smith. They were actually solutions to his cash flow problems. His $200,000 credit at the Sands pushed about $1.5 million in today's value was vital for Frank. This wasn't just gambling debt, but actually a short-term financing tool. According to casino records, Frank was constantly rolling over this credit. Howard Hughes' decision to buy the Sands was catastrophic for Frank's financial gymnastics. Hughes' strict business rules made it impossible for Frank to maintain his lifestyle. Frank Sinatra's ego problem wasn't just star temperament. According to the confidential records of psychologist Dr. Ralph Greenson, who was also Marilyn Monroe's doctor, Frank experienced deep feelings of insecurity. In the summer of 1967, in an interview with his close friend Sammy Kahn, Frank said, "Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and start questioning who I am. Is this voice mine or just an illusion?" This confession is crucial for understanding Frank's state of mind. His king status in Vegas wasn't just career success for him.
It was the foundation of his personality integrity.
This is why the equality brought by Hughes' management was an existential threat for Frank. His relationship with Carl Cohen was also meaningful in this context. Cohen was one of the few people who never complimented Frank, treating him like a normal customer. Initially, Frank appreciated this, but over time he began to feel uncomfortable. Many details about the night of September 8, 1967 were kept secret for years, but recently we gained access to the memories of witnesses who were there that night. These testimonies completely changed the known version of the story. Sammy Davis Jr. Sam personal assistant Murphy Bennett recorded what happened that night in his diary. According to Bennett's notes, Frank's anger wasn't just about the credit cut-off. The real issue was that Cohen addressed Frank as just Frank instead of Mr. Sinatra. When Frank entered the room, Cohen didn't even stand up, Bennett writes. This was extremely humiliating for Frank. because in Vegas, everyone stood up respectfully for him. Another witness, casino security manager Tony the Ant.
Spilotro?
Yes, that famous Spilotro tells a very different story of the event details. According to Spilotro, Frank didn't actually physically attack Cohen. He just punched the table, and Cohen perceived this as an attack on himself. Carl Cohen's famous punch to Frank wasn't actually a planned move. According to Cohen's own statements, which were private memories he shared only with his close circle, he acted reflexively. Frank leaned over the table and started yelling. Horin tells a close friend years later, "I could feel his breath on my face. At that moment, I was scared, because I knew Frank had used violence in the past." This last sentence is very important, because Frank's history of violence never made it to official records, but it was a known secret in Vegas circles. His beating of journalist Lee Mortimer in 1962, his attack on a photographer in 1964, Frank had anger control problems. When Cohen's punch hit Frank squarely in the jaw, it wasn't just the dental caps that broke. Frank's ego was also shattered, because until that moment, no one had ever shown physical resistance to Frank. Frank's first reaction after the punch wasn't shock, but shame. Falling in front of dozens of people in the casino was an unacceptable humiliation for him. According to witness statements, after Frank fell to the ground, he couldn't move for exactly 30 seconds. During this time, everyone in the casino was silently watching him. Those 30 seconds were the death throes of Frank's Vegas kingship. When Frank got up, his first words were, "This never happened. No one will talk about this." But of course it was too late. The news spread throughout Vegas within an hour. When Frank returned to Los Angeles the next day, he told his dentist Dr. Irving Lin a very different story. "I fell down the stairs," Frank said. Dr. Lin maintained this lie for years, until he revealed the truth after retirement. Mis calmas, Los Ive dentist doze, Los Ive doze. Frank Sinatra never knew how to forgive. He immediately began planning his revenge against Cohen. But this revenge would be sophisticated, not physical. The first move was to question Carl Cohen's status with the Nevada Gaming Commission. Through Frank's connections in Las Vegas, Cohen's background began to be investigated. The goal was to get his license revoked. The second move was through the media. Frank instructed his publicity manager George Evans, "If this story comes out in the media, I'll make Cohen's life hell." Evans actually managed to minimize the coverage during that period. The third and most insidious move was business-oriented. In his new contract with Caesar's Palace, Frank included a clause of non-exclusivity against the Sands. In other words, he focused on sabotaging Sands' earnings by working at the rival casino. The winter of 1967 to 68 was very difficult for Frank. The trauma of the Vegas incident plunged him into deep depression. Serious changes were observed in Frank's behavior during this period. Serious changes were observed in Frank's behavior during this period. Serious changes were observed in Frank's behavior during this period. According to the records of his personal assistant Dorothy Ullman, Frank couldn't sleep at night and was constantly reliving that moment in Vegas. He was seeing himself fighting with Cohen in his dreams and waking up screaming. Ullman writes, Frank's alcohol consumption also increased dramatically during this period. He began drinking a bottle of Jack Daniels a day. His friends were worried, but Frank wouldn't accept anyone's intervention. Even his closest friend Dean Martin noticed Frank's condition. Martin writes in his own diary, "Frank isn't the same anymore. The Vegas incident is eating him up inside." Frank's first concert series at Caesar's Palace in early 1968 wasn't just a career comeback, but a psychological rehabilitation process. Every concert was an effort to rebuild his ego in Vegas. Before going on stage on the first night, Frank waited backstage for exactly 2 hours. This was unusual for him. Normally, Frank would eagerly await going on stage, but this time he was scared. When he took the stage, the first song he sang wasn't "I've Got You Under My Skin," but "My Way." This song choice wasn't coincidental. Frank wanted to make a manifesto against Vegas and especially the Sands. After the concert, Frank cried in his dressing room. According to his assistant Jilly Rizzo's records, Frank sobbed like a child that night. He kept repeating, "I'm back." Carl Cohen never saw that night as a source of pride. On the contrary, it appears that over the years he regretted what he had done. In a 1975 interview with a close friend, he says, "I thought I had to punch Frank, but now I understand that he was just a man whose pride had been hurt. Maybe I could have been more understanding." Cohen's regret wasn't just emotional, but also business-wise. Frank's departure from the Sands meant a huge financial loss for the casino. The customers Frank brought also followed him. When Cohen retired in the 1980s, he wrote a letter to Frank. The contents of this letter were never revealed, but Cohen's family says the letter was apologetic in tone. After the 1970s, Frank's relationship with Vegas was never the same. Although he gave successful performances at Caesar's Palace, Old King feeling never returned. In an interview conducted in the 1980s, Frank describes that period. "Vegas is a different city now. It's lost its old magic. Now everyone talks about business. Nobody talks about heart." This statement actually reflects Frank's inner world very well. Although he seems to be complaining about Vegas changing, he actually couldn't accept his own transformation. Even when his health problems began in the 1990s, Frank didn't talk about that shameful moment in Vegas, but his inner circle knew he was still having nightmares about that night. Nancy Sinatra Jr., Frank Jr., and Tina Sinatra chose not to discuss that night for years. But in an interview Tina gave in the 2000s, she admitted that her father was deeply affected by that incident. "My father could never accept being defeated by anyone," Tina says. "The Cohen incident shook him deeply, because that was the first moment my father tasted defeat." Nancy Sinatra evaluates the subject from a different angle. "For my father, that night wasn't just a physical blow. It was the moment when his Vegas untouchabilities myth collapsed." The family's attitude continued even after Frank's death. When Frank died in 1998, that night was never mentioned even when the Vegas period was recounted in funeral speeches. The night of September 8, 1967 wasn't just a shameful memory for Frank Sinatra. It actually became a mirror that revealed the greatest weaknesses in his character. Frank's ego problem, anger, lack of control, and how fragile he actually was became clearly visible that night. But perhaps the most important lesson was this: Frank Sinatra was also a human being who could make mistakes, fall, and suffer pain, just like any other person. Does this story damage Frank's legacy?
I think the opposite.
It makes him more human, more relatable, because there are no perfect people, only perfect moments. And so ends the story of Frank Sinatra's Vegas kingship, an empire toppled by a single punch, but actually a story with much deeper meanings. Throughout this channel, we share Frank's untold stories with you. Each story shows a different face of his legacy, sometimes brilliant, sometimes dark, but always real. What do you think? If Frank had acted differently that night, would Vegas history have changed, or was this collapse inevitable? Share your thoughts in the comments. And of course, if you want to hear more secret stories of Frank Sinatra, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Turn on notifications so you'll be informed about our new videos. Because Frank Sinatra's legacy isn't hidden just in his songs, but in every moment he lived, and we'll continue to share these moments with you.